One, two, three. What the? Hold on. There we go. All right. What's up, everyone? This is Ricardo from lacartita.com. I just want to let you know that we're still making lots of news, but everything has gone on to the chat. Everything has gone towards making this stuff conversational. You can see our latest vector database powered chat on the homepage, but we ain't really going to talk about that right now. What we're going to talk about is just the news. And there are really three major storylines for the lacatita.com reader, average viewer, and that is the CIA in Mexico triggering off a low intensity war against allegedly the cartels, but historically probably the left in Mexico, forced disappearances, anyone opposing business, that type of thing. And then whichever cartel goes with them to accomplish these goals will be the preferred cartel. So there's that. And then on the other end is the fact that the ogre Trump is in China. So if he's in China, who's in charge, right? I mean, he's not really in charge. He's kind of symbolic as Biden was when he was falling asleep at the wheel as well. But the point is that we have all of these different movements taking place, and it's important to keep them in in mind as the American business class finds itself groveling at the feet of China to open up their markets. This is the second time that Trump has been to China. The first time in 2017, that led to tariffs, which haven't been removed. And it's kind of been like a handbrake. I think for both economies are able to adjust and innovate, etc. And China has essentially splintered off into its own reputable electronics, automaking, and under electronics we could put semiconductors, but basically they've accomplished so much just as an advanced economy. They've asserted themselves in a way that I don't think anyone expected. So I really think we are in for a very heavy news cycle. Probably some crazy announcements tomorrow where they have some memorandum of understanding. Maybe they remove tariffs in exchange for some type of diplomacy with Iran. The U.S. is in a really vulnerable position, and I think it's starting to land home that the U.S. is at parity with China. It's not a one-to-one mapping, right? You can't map the U.S. capacity for certain technological innovation with the Chinese capacity for that. Um, and so what we have is a concept from economics called complementary advantages, right? Sorry, comparative advantage. And so, there's absolute advantages, comparative advantage. So it costs less, for example, for the Chinese economy to produce an electric car than it does the US. It costs less for them to produce a semiconductor. Or if not a semiconductor made by Huawei, um, for them to just consult with um, other means of innovating around that limitation that American AI companies don't have to contend with, right? So China has developed its own sort of parallel AI and automotive industry, and the U.S. is probably looking for some type of aperture, some type of way to ingress into that market. So that's what's happening in a really macro level. Trump got there, I think, like basically midnight Thursday, our time in the U.S., any time zone in the continental U.S. Um, and he's been groveling since he's got there, right? Like Xi Jinping is someone who, in a sense, holds all the cards. You can see here that he was greeted by children. Who knows if that's like a subtle ode to the Epstein thing? I've seen that online. I don't believe it, but That's the flow around his state visit. And these state visits aren't trivial matters. They're to hammer out details as far as how these two major powers will administer themselves, because that will ramify across the globe. And I think as time passes, this will be one of those key means that we'll point to when we say the dollar was either restored in value or displaced. When you have Larry Fink, people from Blackstone, CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, Musk, a military contractor, right? When you have people who represent massive amounts of private capital all hoarding to China, you can only mean one of two things. Either Tim Cook, who's a chairman of Apple now, he's not the CEO. Well, he's technically still the CEO, but in announcing another CEO, he's like trying to draw the fire away from him when he visits Trump in that capacity. But basically, you're having a consolidation of power and presence in a way that doesn't usually happen unless all of these people have already gotten some type of foreboding with respect to announcements and developments in China's economy. So this photo is telling. I mean, some people read into it. They're assuming that because it's just Trump by himself, there's really nothing to it. I don't. I mean, I don't think so. If we read on, we can start looking at it. So yeah, at the time, one of the most important announcements was that um, there's this idea that it was necessary for China and the U.S. to have some kind of hot or even Cold War. Any type of open conflict would amount to a waste of time, really. The Chinese are very adept um, at developing economic relations with important neighbors, with important regional influences to obtain the resources that they need to continue developing their economy. Remember, they're not an oil producing state. So one of their main trading partners is Iran. So you have that, and Russia. So you have this Chinese need for natural energy that isn't being met probably at the moment at the rate that they would prefer, and this destabilizes their economy and as a result their currency. It's a weakness that structurally the U.S. does not have. The U.S. has all types of resources within the continental United States, and so over decades they've built up this ability to be immune from oil shocks, although you're probably feeling it at the pump. And that could be a combination of two things: price gouging, and then also the fact that we have a ability to create refined fuel at one rate that is at a distance away from the ability to import that same fuel or that same oil needed for refinement. So it could just be like global demand is tapping into that fuel because now the U.S. has been a net exporter. So you're having all these type of factors that don't weigh on the Chinese economy. They weigh on primarily on the American consumer who's in debt, and they won't impact. There's this like difference between how American business contends with energy at scale and how the average consumer does it. And then in the Chinese case, they just can't get any of that flow that they would normally want. So it's a dynamic that we have to observe. And this meeting will be key at deciding whether the dollar stays or not. So that's what the news item with China. I mean, he's there. There's been a lot of incidents which you can see on social media, but what they don't really touch upon is the overall potential for this to either go sideways or to actually provide some type of semblance of um, of improvements in people's lives. Obviously, speaking about people's lives, there was the Microsoft, LinkedIn layoffs, and they've just ripped through the company with 850 people at least, according to some reports, being laid off, or 5% of the workforce. It's not clear to me how many people are actually working at LinkedIn, but basically, it's an interesting development when the job seeking site decides to not make job seeking relevant. So, yeah, interesting stuff. Anyways, Another thing that has been hot in the news is the fact that we have Sam Altman and Elon Musk, who, in the latest news item from La Cartita, are in court fighting it out. And the testimony from Musk has been interesting. He's he's often been positioned by both his social media bots on X and by some of the press that's very friendly as someone who's interested in the greater good. He's allegedly someone who wants to make AI good for everyone, something that is safe, something that won't affect people, yada, 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 right? But the reality of it has been he really wanted to have control over it. He saw the possibilities that were latent in machine learning models that could be refined to such a point that algorithms and machine learning models would provide us with very interesting results once inference was ran. So if you had a large enough model with enough of the right algorithms behind them or over them, then you would be able to have better derived applications. Unfortunately for Musk, OpenAI went their direction. And so the headline for this is um, Sam Altman, flawed sociopath or not, may be the last barrier between Elon Musk and total AI control. And what we mean with that is Musk already is making this like neo-Nazi or neo-right-wing um, ecosystem, technological ecosystem, to sort of be away from the cultural, moral standards that have governed Apple or Google to a lesser extent, and just kind of be able to make these flagrant underage images that X has been accused of formerly in France, or siphon off public data, or distill other models in a immoral way or a gray area way. So he wants to make this totally different ecosystem with people's data, of course. And he has all of these plugs, right? He has connections with the government, connections with private capital, the military, because of SpaceX. So all of these different elements are coalescing so that this one person, at least on paper, has control over trillions of dollars of military and commercial hardware. And that ecosystem is what's going to allow people to is what we're essentially going to receive if he wins this court. I think it's very important that people understand that Sam Altman and OpenAI and ChatGPT, um, they are not quite the enemy that we make them out to be. I'm not shilling for these people. I think they're kind of living in la la land and they're snake oil salesmen when it comes to alleging that AGI is going to come from everyone's jobs. That's kind of their job, though. Their job is to make sure that the attention is and lore is such that without this technology, we're all going to die. Like that is the job. He's basically a hype man for private capital. And a lot of these people, including Musk, don't know how to code, don't know the actual technical limitations, but they do know that if they exaggerate and amplify the use case, like Musk has been doing with Tesla's self-driving and with the robo taxi that is kind of like sputtered out for 10 years, and he brings it around whenever he needs to rally up investor sentiment. These things, they exist in a concept form and in a really like low grade form, but they don't really do much. Like if you need a plumber, you're still going to call that person, and if you really need a really good software engineer, that person might even use AI because it's a better, more nuanced and predictive search engine. But at the same time, it's not that deep in terms of being able to architect and understand how certain humans will use the downstream applications made from AI. So AI itself isn't even doing that great of a job in one of the best domains for it to do and dominate, which is in software. But companies are getting rid of people left and right under that premise because it's a good premise. It allows them to say, hey, look, with the people that are here, we're going to squeeze the crap out of them because we can, because we're giving them these tokens. And now we're going to have like 10x production with 5% reduction of layoffs. Like, everyone's happy, right? Because not everyone got fired. And so that's what's happening. And if Musk gets control over OpenAI in some sense, or any type of precedent is set where he comes out winning, I think that's a net loss for the general public. And I think the best thing we could hope for is for Musk to be sat down, essentially, to for Musk to be um, restrained in some way, shape, or form, because as it stands, he has way too much power. And Sam Altman's testimony is actually very interesting. He's mentioned that Musk wanted his family to be part of like some type of hereditary structure, basically ownership of a company that wasn't a company, that was a nonprofit. So if you're thinking about the nonprofit in those terms already, it's not your food bank type of operation. It's a legal structure that you innovated and found is particularly good for your purposes. And it probably allows you to, you know, donate some money but receive a tax benefit. And that dynamic is basically fraud, but at that scale and with that impact, they're going to get away with it. Um, Even so, some of the other testimony was that, you know, he must saw himself as a founder, and then the pivot to private commercial use was a uniquely Sam Altman pivot that betrayed the original vision. Other things around Musk's donations were also exaggerated. They were significant. Obviously, 38 million is not chump change, but he was alleging 1 billion. So that's another dynamic where you got these people who just exaggerate 24/7. That's their job. And so I wouldn't take so many of the comments to heart. I would look at AI as a tool, and if you can use it, you're probably right. And if you can use it for something, and but find that with certain prompts or certain inputs and outputs you improve it, you should note it, and you should kind of work with experts in the field, or people who are more experienced. So that's just our communication to people who are, aware of this case. We need Musk lose, basically, and that's all there is to it. So better that Musk lose, and then we just contend with a world where it's kind of like a duopoly or oligopoly, because a monopoly under Musk is basically some type of proto-fascist or fascist structure. So we all have to kind of watch out for that. So, Ricardo, thanks so much for listening to this long summary. It's supposed to be a summary, but I think it gives you all the context. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Bye bye.